in the heart triad, specifically, I think a gift we have to offer, particularly at this point in time, is that feelings require a little more time than thinking or accomplishing. And we're moving awful fast, and I'm not sure that we're listening when other people share feelings. And when I say we, I mean the collective we. And I'm sure that there are instances in life that require a feeling response. And we're the only people on the Enneagram who can comfortably hold feelings while people kind of find their way through.
Hello, and welcome to More Than Sunday, a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive into the stories, themes, and questions of our faith. My name is Eric Chakowski. I'm the worship director for Access, our modern worship community at First United Methodist Church, Richardson. I'm also a 3 on the Enneagram, and with me every week is our lead pastor, Julie Richter, who is also a 3 on the Enneagram.
That is right.
We are like-minded people.
We are, which can be good and can be dangerous all at the same time.
That's right.
So for Enneagram 2s, 3s, and 4s, we fall in what is called the heart triad. So in this sermon series called Head, Heart, and Hands, we are talking to those and about those who are thinking dominant, feeling dominant, and doing dominant. And so this last week on Sunday, I preached to the heart. I preached about those people, including Eric and I, who are feeling dominant. Now, what that means is that for people who feel, or their orientation is predominantly to feeling first. It doesn't mean that we don't think or do, but our thinking and our doing often supports our feeling. But it's normally the feelings of other people, not our own feelings. And so if those who are thinking dominant take in the world by first starting inside and then working and seeing the world outside, those who are feeling dominant take in the outside world in order to understand what's going on inside.
So we are so excited today to welcome on the podcast Suzanne Stabile. She's a 2 on the Enneagram, so she resides in the heart triad, and we're so excited to talk to her today. Well, we are here with Suzanne Stabile. Suzanne is an Enneagram Master Teacher and also the author of The Road Back to You and her new book, The Path Between Us. She's widely regarded as an authority on the Enneagram and just an incredible teacher and mentor in this discipline. So, Suzanne, we're honored to have you here. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So would you just give us a little bit of background on you so that our listeners just know a little bit more about you and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I was gifted with the opportunity to grow up in a small town in the Panhandle, and I'm an adopted child. So I think the reason I ended up doing Enneagram work in part is because I didn't look like anybody. So I spent my life as a child watching how people behaved to see who I acted like. Because as an Enneagram 2, I wanted connection all the time. So I think I started preparing for this long before I knew that I was doing that. And I came to SMU after I finished high school, and my life dream was to coach college basketball. And I did. I was the first coach at SMU after Title IX, which was a thing. A lot of press, no money. That's how that worked out. Yeah. But that was a good time for me, too, in terms of my personality, because I had to push a lot, and I generally schmooze rather than push. I married and was in a complex relationship that didn't work, and divorced, and I was the single mom of 3 kids. And then Father Joe Stabile, not because of me, decided to leave the priesthood after 40 years, and he and I started dating and married, and he's now been in the Methodist Church for the last 30 years. And he knew of Richard Rohr. And I don't know if your listeners know, but Richard Rohr is the guru for Enneagram wisdom in terms of a Christian perspective, and was one of the first people to publish anything. And so he called him one day and said, I've had a really interesting journey, and he and Richard are 3 years apart age-wise, but they're contemporaries in that they went through the same kind of seminary system. Joe was a Vincentian and Richard was Franciscan, but it was still the same. They left home and went to high school seminary and didn't come home for 9 years and all kinds of stuff. So he just called Father Rohr and said, can my wife and I come see you? And we went to see him, and he became our spiritual director and advisor, and he gave me some Enneagram books to read, and I fell in love with it. And then he suggested that I should study for 5 years before I start talking about it. So I did. And that was a challenge at first, but then I figured out that I was getting something other people weren't getting, and that became the goal for me. And our children all live here. They're all married, and we have 9 grandchildren, and I'm crazy in love with Joe. So life's really pretty great.
So, Suzanne, you mentioned that you are a 2.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk about that here in a minute. So for some of our listeners who have never heard of the Enneagram, what would maybe be your elevator pitch for what the Enneagram is?
That's the second hardest question anybody ever asks me. I've been working on an elevator pitch for a long time, and I can't say that I have that, but here's what I would say. The Enneagram is ancient wisdom, and it references 9 ways of seeing. And I think we all assume that when we're having the same experience, looking at the same thing, that we're all taking it in the same way, processing it the same way, and going to carry it with us in the same way. And that's just not true. And those 9 ways of seeing are the things that I think can connect us, but currently divide us, which isn't necessary. But I think it's because of lack of understanding that people just see very differently. And Enneagram wisdom is that you can't change how you see. All you can do is change what you do with how you see. So once I realized that if you line up 9 people and have them look through a knothole in a fence at the same thing on the other side, they're all really seeing something completely different. Then I realized that all that talk we have around, I would never do something like that, or why would she say that? Or, I used to look at our 4 children and think, where did we get you? Like, and I'm sure they feel the same way about me. And I just started growing in what is this difference? And I think because of all that has happened in the last 50 years, we tend, particularly in the church, to look for how we're the same. And I don't think that's working. And so Enneagram wisdom of 9 ways of seeing sets the stage for a completely different way of being in community with one another. The thing that differentiates the Enneagram from other systems that are like it is that it's not static. So I have appreciation and respect for all personality typing systems. I think they all offer us something. I think we can get something from all of them. But I kind of need to know what I'm supposed to do with what I learn. And I don't know what to do with the fact that on Myers-Briggs I'm an ENFJ. I have spent the last 25 years trying to figure out what to do with the reality that I'm a 2 on the Enneagram and that I have access to all of this wisdom and ways of behaving better should I want to or choose to.
So you are a 2 on the Enneagram. Would you give us a little bit of context about what that means? And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about why we're having a conversation around heart today.
Okay. Well, being a 2 means that I'm in the heart triad. And that means that shame is accessible to me perhaps more easily than 6 of the other numbers, but it also means that I'm focused on feelings most of the time. So the triad that I'm in is sometimes called the heart triad, but it's also called the emotionally centered triad. It's also called the relationship triad. And in beginning to understand that I take in information with feelings, and then I believe I have to do something about that, I've spent probably 10 years exploring how to figure out what's mine to do based on what I feel and based on feelings that I pick up from other people. And I think one of the most important things I ever teach about the Enneagram is that the best part of you is also the worst part of you. And the best part of me is that I am easy to relate to, and I kind of pick up quickly on other people's feelings. But that's also the worst part of me, because in Enneagram wisdom, what one learns is that 2s feel other people's feelings and not their own. So earlier in the podcast, I said that the elevator speech is one of the 2 hardest things that anybody ever asks me. And the other is, what are you feeling? Because I don't usually know. I just know what people around me feel. And when that determines your behavior, it's tricky, very tricky.
That was something that I had to learn as I began to grow in my own Enneagram knowledge and journey. I always thought I was really good at knowing my own feelings.
Yeah.
And I'm not. I have always been really good at knowing other people's feelings. And the way that I would describe that when I was younger is that I have just a lot of different voices, that I don't always hear God because I'm always hearing my mom or my dad or my brother or my friend or my pastor. And I could never shut out the other voices, but really the other feelings of what other people wanted for me around me, to actually know what I wanted and what I was feeling. And so that was really, really helpful information for me and knowledge for me.
So in the midst of the conversation around your number and around the heart triad, what are some other strengths that you feel like for 2s or for people in the heart triad specifically?
People in the heart triad, specifically, I think a gift we have to offer, particularly at this point in time, is that feelings require a little more time than thinking or accomplishing. And we're moving awful fast, and I'm not sure that we're listening when other people share feelings. And when I say we, I mean the collective we, not us, because we're all in the feeling triad. And I'm sure that there are instances in life that require a feeling response as opposed to action or thought or a discussion or a book to read or any of that. And we're the only people on the Enneagram who can comfortably hold feelings while people kind of find their way through them. So the faster we move, the less likely we are to be mindful of other people's feelings. And just like we don't all see the world the same way, we also don't respond with feelings in the same way. You know, things that make me very sad don't actually make Joe sad. He gets sad about other things, but he's not in the feeling triad. So if I don't go after what he's sad about, I don't ever find out. So I think there's a blind spot that people have if they aren't paying attention to feelings. Not to say that we 3 don't also have blind spots having to do with thinking and doing, right?
Right.
I just think culturally, right now, feelings are really important, and they take more time than most people have.
So on the other side of that coin, we've mentioned knowing what we need in terms of feelings and knowing how we feel. What are some other growth areas that you think those in the heart triad could learn?
You know, there is a self-satisfaction that comes with reading somebody's feelings and then making them feel better, according to our perception, that I'm not sure is always accurate. Like, because we feel all these floating feelings that are around, and in different ways, the 3 of us offer some solution or some wisdom for that. If we're satisfied, we think they are. And I'm not sure that's always true. Yeah. I think we kind of work through stuff and people are still exactly where they were, struggling with exactly what they were struggling with. I also am convinced that for the overall programming you guys are doing, we ought to have some balance in thinking, feeling, and doing, and we need to use feelings appropriately. And if you're a feeling person, schmoozing comes pretty easy. And I think we have to really be thoughtful about that. And I also think feeling dominant people tend to over-involve at times in other people's business or not give other people enough room to make their own choices and have their own experience. So it's kind of a knowing when to involve and knowing when to back up, I think. And that's just hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to know.
Yeah.
Julie and I were just talking recently about being willing to let some things go that aren't ours to hold, and that's a really difficult thing for both of us to do. The instances where we've found some success have been healthy, but it's definitely a habit for
it's so
both of us
hard
to see something that, as a 3, that we feel like we can improve or make better, or, even when our motivation is, I would say, better and healthier, that we genuinely want to be helpful in helping someone improve something that they're doing. It's just a really difficult practice for us not to step into those places.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're all heart-centered people, we still respond differently.
Yes.
You 2 3s and me as a 2. And one of the things that happens is, let's say we're watching somebody who's really struggling, and your solution is to fix it. And so you jump in with, you should do this or this or this. But my solution is to sit down and listen to how you're struggling. And I think it's pretty clear to anybody who's listening that either one of those without the other one is probably not all that great, right? Like, I can listen, and y'all are just trying to, let's get this fixed so that we can move on. And I think something that people don't know about 3s in particular is that you generally are trying to help people be who they want to be, not trying to get them to be the people that you think they could be.
Mm-hmm.
I heard an executive coach say one time that I'm convinced must be a 3. He said, I exist to help people and organizations live into their potentials and capabilities.
Yeah.
And I had so much clarity in my life about, that could be a mantra for me when I'm operating in a healthy way. But as you said, really helping people live into who they want to be, right? Not who I want them to be, is so important in that process. And stepping into the 2 world to be able to take the time to listen with them and discern with them is a vital part of that process.
One of the things I talked about in church yesterday was trying to distinguish the difference, and this was more me preaching to me, the difference between being vulnerable and being dramatic.
Oh.
And the difference between being vulnerable and schmoozing.
Yep.
Right? Because
Right.
I know what you need me to be. And so if I need empathy from you, there's a difference between me telling you how I really feel and what's really going on in my life versus trying to gain sadness from you or trying to pull a certain emotion out of you because that's what I think that you want from me. And that's constant work for me to learn the difference between being authentic and vulnerable and when I'm just putting on a show.
So when we talk about those interpersonal relationships, Suzanne, your new book, The Path Between Us, really does some examination of relationship between numbers. So how has your understanding of your number as a 2 affected your own personal relationships?
Here's the honest answer. It made them all better. But that sounds a little... a 3-ish,
of course they
actually.
Did.
I would just say that Joe is a 9. Our children are 4 different numbers. None of us are looking at the world in the same way when they were little or now, that they're all adults. My mother was in the head triad, so she was a thinker, and I grew up like kind of wanting more affection than she had. And if I'd known the Enneagram then, and if she had known the Enneagram then, we could have bridged that in a different way. And she did a fantastic job, but we just could have, And the one thing I always wanted to be, I don't know if it's because I'm adopted or what, but I wanted to be married happily, and I wanted children so much. And I believe without the Enneagram, I would have maybe a third of the relationship that I have with each of my children because I knew how to give them room to be themselves. And once you learn the Enneagram, you have different expectations from people. I'm doing quite a bit of work now in the recovery community using the Enneagram. And one of their lines in recovery is every expectation is resentment waiting to happen. And if you expect other people to respond to life like you do, you end up resenting other people because they don't. And it's because that's not how they're put together. So I would say that my best language is knowing the Enneagram for me as a 2 in relationships means that I can make room for people to not be like me. At the same time, I can give myself permission to not be them. And once we get to that ground that we're all standing on, then we're forming a completely different kind of relationship than we are looking for sameness or looking for agreement. You know, I'm not even sure that we're still tribal. It feels to me like we're all just divided into these tiny little groups of people who think exactly like we do. I don't think that's going to be very productive long term.
Yeah, I agree. So you've mentioned your husband a little bit and your own faith. And so one of our last questions for you is, how has the Enneagram not only affected your personal relationships, but your faith?
So I started out life with the gift of parents who, without ever being preachy or churchy, made room for and believed that there should be room for everybody at the table. So I didn't really experience insiders and outsiders on any kind of significant level until I was in college. And I found it heartbreaking and very troubling. And I didn't come up with an explanation for the language that went around that until I learned the Enneagram. In my faith journey, I've experienced things that I would never expect to happen to me. And I've experienced the high side and the low side of the church because I'm a pastor's wife. The most significant part of the journey and how it's affected my faith life is that it allows me to step back and let God do what God's doing and then find my way in that rather than feel like I have to start a new thing. I have the advantage of living with, I actually think Joe Stabile is the best person on the planet. And I say that everywhere, and I have for years and years. I don't think he's perfect or any of that, but he just has all kinds of grace. And I think the Enneagram teaches grace. And I just want more and more of it. I want more and more grace for everybody, for every religion, for every faith belief, for all of this stuff that's happening that's divisive. And I think God's big enough for all that. And I'm real clear that I'm not. But without the Enneagram, I think I would be in my way all the time. I'm a journaler, and so I've got journals from way back. And I remember looking back through some journals from my first year of journaling when I was learning the Enneagram. And I have an entry there that says, "It is striking to me today for the first time to think that perhaps God doesn't need as much help from me as I thought." I can't even think about that now without laughing. That was 25 years ago. But it's like I felt like as a 2, boy, God really needs me. Mm-hmm. And what God needs from me is for me to know what's mine to do and what's not mine to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and as I've learned more and more about the Enneagram, I think so often when we talk about the body of Christ and we think maybe in vocation or we think in occupation or we think, well, the kingdom needs doctors and the kingdom needs preachers and the kingdom needs plumbers. But I think the more that I've learned about Enneagram, the kingdom needs 2s and the kingdom needs 3s.
Absolutely.
And the kingdom needs every number. And the diversity in that is just reflected as the beauty of the way that we've been created.
Yeah, you know, old teaching from the Christian tradition in terms of mysticism in the Enneagram says that the Enneagram is the face of God, that it just takes all of us. And, you know, Joe happens to be on staff at a very large church, and you guys are at a really big church here. And I think one of the advantages that we have that isn't everywhere is that once a community of people become Enneagram-wise, people can kind of figure out what they're gifted for and what they're not. And we have the opportunity to have a staff that's large enough that people can be hired for their gifts, all of which are associated with your Enneagram number. There's not a way, I don't think, to distinguish spiritual gifts from your Enneagram number. They always call on the way you see the world.
So we've got one more question, Suzanne, that we ask everyone that comes on the podcast. And that question is, at this point in your life, what's one thing that you wish someone would have told you?
I think that I wish I could have heard people telling me that I was wanted. I actually think people have been saying that to me all my life, but I've been looking to hear that all my life too. And that has to do with the Enneagram, but there's not time to talk about that. But I think we all have a message that we want to hear, and I think it was offered. I just wasn't able to receive it until maybe the last 10 years.
Suzanne, we could not be more grateful for this time with you today. So thank you for coming and joining us today, and for the wisdom and the gifts that you give, not only to our listeners, but all over the country, both in your books and in your workshops and your teachings. You are just such a joy and a gift.
Thank you so much for having me, and kudos to you guys for doing this. I'm old enough to just say I'm really proud of you. It's a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You
We
betcha.
really appreciate that from you.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
It was such a joy to sit with Suzanne today, and for just a few minutes to lean on all of the wisdom and the knowledge that she has. We wanted to let you know that Suzanne also has her own podcast. It's called the Enneagram Journey, so check it out if you want to hear more about the work that she is doing, the conversations that she is having, and all of the knowledge and wisdom that she has to share about the Enneagram.
One of the greatest blessings of wisdom I think that Suzanne shared with us today was that not everything is ours to do, and that one of the most important journeys that we can take is learning to discern the difference between what we believe the world wants from us and what is actually ours to do.
We want to leave you today with a scripture from Deuteronomy that talks about a sign or a message that should be in front of us all the time, to remind us who we are as people of faith and what is ours to do as people of faith. Deuteronomy 6, starting in verse 4, says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk to them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates."
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of More Than Sunday. If you like the podcast, please feel free to share it, go online and leave a comment, or give us a rating so that others might hear about us. We've got a new episode coming out every Wednesday, so make sure you also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or on YouTube so you don't miss our next episode. If you want to find out more about the Access community here at First United Methodist Church Richardson, you can find us online at accessfumcr.com, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. Special thanks to Suzanne Stabile for joining us this week, and make sure you tune in next Wednesday when we have a conversation with Joey Shuey about hands. Have a great week.